How's it going, guys? This is Thotline Miami, and today we're going to do a political compass video with some Sith Lords from Star Wars. Why are we doing this? Don't question me like that. Don't question me like that. Don't do that. It's hurtful. It's hurtful. I like politics. I like Star Wars. I like the little intersection between the two of them, so we're just going to do it, okay? We're just going to do it. I know a relatively tragic amount about Star Wars, but we're only going to focus on the Sith Lords from the films, the shows, and a little bit from Legends, right? So basically just sort of the main Skywalker saga continuity from about Darth Plagueis to Darth Sidious Vader. While I don't necessarily hate the sequel trilogy, I won't be doing any of the Sith from the sequel trilogy because there's only one Sith and there are no well-written Sith. And we're talking about the political compass, which is sort of an internet culture thing that popped up in the sort of 2010s. Obviously, you know what that is. That's sort of left to right, up to down. And we're going to be putting them on there. So let's get into it. So we're going to start with a very easy favourite of mine. We're going to sort of go chronologically. It's got to be Darth Plagueis the Wise. So the Darth Plagueis novel, which is where I get most of my understanding of Darth Plagueis from, is technically no longer canon according to Disney. However, it is such a good book and I would recommend it so strongly that I do not care what Bob Iger says is canon. As far as I'm concerned, that is the story of Darth Plagueis and it's perfect, so I'm going to use that as the source of sort of his character. Plagueis proves himself to be this kind of perfect epitome of the Sith rule of two. This idea that the Sith, rather than being these disparate factions of warriors, they do better being these cloaked, shadowy puppet masters that manipulate galactic events from the shadows using jobs of privilege, education, positions of hierarchy. Plagueis, through his public identity as Higo Damask, is one of the top figures in the intergalactic banking clan and the head of a massive financial holdings called Damask Holdings. He spends the entirety of the Plagueis novel leading up to the events of the Phantom Menace, and he's also not on screen, but he is alive in the Phantom Menace. He's manipulating events, he's controlling people, he's financing all of the events that form the films. So he's the one who gets the clone army financed. He's the one that manipulates, with the help of Sidious, manipulates the Trade Federation into the blockade of Naboo. And all the events leading up to that, the corruption of the Republic, the downfall of the Senate, the spiral of galactic society into decadence and suspicion, that's all him through manipulation, financing the right elements, and using his shadowy privilege to control everything. Plagueis is like a classic oligarch, okay? He's this thinker that views the galaxy as a place where the strong and the wise and the powerful and the privileged, the people who have a kind of enlightened way forward, should have control and dominion over a less enlightened mass population. So his whole thing was like, I am the enlightened one, I will therefore control the galaxy using my power. The universal sense of kind of hatred and this need for empire-style, forceful control over the galaxy, you don't see that in Plagueis in the same way that you see it in Sidious or Vader later down the line. In Plagueis, it's very much just business. It's like, if you're in his way, he'll you without a second thought. But if you're not a direct threat to him, if you're not a problem for him, he's happy to just leave you to your business, knowing that he generally views himself as above everyone else, but doesn't really feel the need to interfere directly in things that aren't a problem for him or aren't a potential win or asset for him. It's really easy to think of Plagueis as an allegory for people like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, etc. These obscenely wealthy, privileged, powerful people who, obviously, they're not interfering directly with the lives of individuals, right? They're not sending people after people they don't like or anything, but they are changing the macro. They are controlling institutions and the way that countries work and the way that governments are able to function and things like that, using their soft influence but also their financial power. All kind of following this ideology that they are this enlightened, successful, powerful few who are responsible for inspiring and corralling and shepherding the uninspired masses. And for this focus on wealth and individual power, I'm going to put Darth Plagueis firmly in the libertarian quadrant of the political spectrum. Just a side point, I don't think a lot of people realise, go read the Darth Plagueis novel because it's fantastic, but people don't realise how bloody racist Darth Plagueis was throughout the whole book. He spends the whole book interacting with basically every species in Star Wars that you could care to name, and he spends the whole time like, oh my god, all these species are so inferior, it's so insufferable to be around these inferior creatures as an enlightened immune as mine. But yeah, no question, Darth Plagueis, firmly in the libertarian quadrant. Next up is going to be Darth Maul, but the Darth Maul that we encountered in The Phantom Menace, so his first chronological appearance. This section is going to be incredibly quick because Darth Maul has approximately 3 lines in the entire film, and despite the fact that Ray Park is an incredibly talented performer, he doesn't get to say any of them. But through the film and the book, the Darth Plagueis book, which is also from Maul's perspective at some points, Maul shows to have this very ferocious and dogmatic commitment to the dark side and to the way of the Sith in general. What sets Maul apart from most Sith is how traditional he is in The Phantom Menace. Like, the only line that he has of any significance is when he says, at last we shall reveal ourselves to the Jedi, at last we shall have our revenge, and he's trying to be all hard and stuff. But he views him and Palpatine as like a unit, as a team, which no Sith has ever done really does before. Every other Sith is constantly trying to overthrow and betray every other Sith. Maul is the only one that at that point doesn't really, right? He's on board with the Sith, he's on board with Palpatine, he's a very traditional apprentice, disciple, etc. And since he's got this kind of brute force mentality and modus operandi as a Sith assassin, like he's not a negotiator, he's not a manipulator, he just fights people and is very good at it. You can only really put him in the kind of authoritarian conservative section, closer to the authoritarian line at the top. Full disclosure, when Darth Maul did what he did to Qui-Gon at the end of The Phantom Menace, I watched it when I was about 7, and I couldn't watch The Phantom Menace to the end after that. I had to always turn it off until I was about... The stress of remembering this trauma has triggered me, so I'm watching a William Afton video essay to calm down. But absolutely, Phantom Menace, Darth Maul, authoritarian right, closer to the top, closer to the middle. But moving on to my glorious superior king and one of my favourite characters of all time, Dooku. There are arguments that Dooku is not Sith. I disagree. He was not the one Sith apprentice Palpatine wanted, but he very much was a Sith. And I think it would be a disservice to the late great Christopher Lee and his amazing performance not to include Dooku on this one. You know, he only had 11 minutes of screen time. Look it up. Count Dooku is on screen for 11 minutes and 30 seconds, and in that time, Sir Christopher Lee was able to make one of the deepest and most nuanced characters in Star Wars, as well as a fan favourite. Like those episodes of Tales of the Jedi where you could very easily describe Dooku as a classical liberal. Like, he's easily on the right side of things. He's very conservative. Like, even his dueling style is Makashi, Form 2, which is traditional lightsaber on lightsaber, like classic dueling style that mirrors Sir Christopher Lee's own fencing skills. And then if you think about the reason he defected to the dark side in the first place, he left the Jedi because of this commitment to classic liberal values of freedom, justice, equality, dismissal of corruption, deciding that the Senate was too corrupt. So you can kind of see he very much fits on the right side of things, not necessarily in an authoritarian way. Like, okay, by the time he's defeated in Revenge of the Sith, he very much is just a chess piece for Palpatine, a pawn in the grand game of the one true Sith. However, up until that point, especially his origins and his transition from being a Jedi to a dark side user to a Sith, you see very much he's very committed to this idea of rebellion, and he basically starts the Confederacy of Independent Systems. So when we combine these classical liberal values of sort of freedom, rebellion, individuality, and then you combine it with Dooku's very conservative mindset when it comes to approaches to the Force, approaches to lightsaber combat, he even hated Anakin for having a robotic arm, because in his view, a gentleman would lose his arm and learn to fight with one arm. That's how conservatively minded he was. He would probably have a few problematic prejudices in the real world. He would either be like a libertarian Republican or a very, very conservative Democrat. I won't elaborate on that. But for that mix of classical liberalism and conservatism, I'm going to put him all the way on the far edge of that line on the right side of the political compass. Dooku's another fantastic character in the Darth Plagueis novel. Like I say, you see that really strong mix of stark individuality and harsh conservative traditionalism. And if you're very interested in Dooku as a character, I'd also recommend Dooku Jedi Lost. That's another fantastic, more recent Star Wars novel about Dooku's origins as a Jedi and him transitioning into a Sith Lord. Disney, if you're watching, I want Tales of the Jedi Season 2, and I want it to be Sith training with Palpatine and Dooku constructing his red lightsaber, okay? Chop, 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 chop. Next up, we're going to do Darth Maul, but the Darth Maul from Clone Wars and Rebels, because as far as I'm concerned, the Darth Maul from The Phantom Menace and the Darth Maul that we then see again in the animated shows, different characters. See, this Darth Maul, after going through so much, after recovering, getting his new legs, making his way as a new rival faction in the galaxy, he is smarter, he's more cunning, he's more of a schemer, but most of all, in my opinion, he's a liberal. Hear me out, okay? The last Darth Maul, the one from the Phantom Menace, is more kind of dogmatic and traditional and committed to being this kind of perfect Sith apprentice. Whereas the new Darth Maul, the one from Clone Wars and Rebels, is much more of a kind of, I will make my way with my schemes no matter what. He's happy to team up with pirates. He's happy to team up with the Death Watch, who are a word I can't really say. He's happy to team up with Ahsoka, who's a Jedi, or a part-time Jedi, whatever you want to call it. And by the time of the Empire, when we get to sort of Star Wars Rebels and he's reintroduced, he's just kind of doing his own thing. Like, he doesn't really care about the grand plan of the Sith. He was a Sith. He's definitely a Darksider. He's only really focused on going after Kenobi. He doesn't really care who he has to team up with, who he has to double-cross, who he has to take down. He goes up against Inquisitors. He blinds Kanan. He has this weird apprentice obsession with Ezra Bridger. Like, he's not committed to anything, and that, in my view, makes him a bit of a... Not saying that liberals aren't committed to anything, but just this more kind of open-minded, not too constrained by any tradition or values or anything. He's very much just committed to the here and now. And what kind of confirms him as a lib left for me, this version of the character, is Sam Witwer's amazing performance, which just exudes an absurd amount of bi energy. It's the bit in Clone Wars where he's got Kenobi by like the face and is holding his face and going, I will make you suffer every cut, Kenobi. And it's just like, just kiss him already, bro. Just kiss. You know you will. There's just a lot of tension. And I'm feeling that tension, okay? The allegations are not helped by the fact that Maul spends his final moments in Kenobi's arms. It's like, I'm going to put Maul kind of sort of center-left, but quite close to the line. Because he's not that liberal in terms of getting what he wants. He just doesn't really have any rules or conditions or norms or values that he sticks to anymore at this point. Kind of, he's been through it all and now he just wants to achieve his goals regardless of any kind of orthodoxy regarding the Sith or the Jedi or anything. Vader. There is one place that Vader goes. You know where he's going, right? I'm going to tell you before I even explain it. He's going at the very top. He's going at the very top. In fact, I don't know, I have to edit this afterwards. I'm going to make an extra bit that's even more authoritarian just for Vader. Like, dead center, don't get me wrong, no political affiliation, just authoritarianism and nothing else. My guy lost his wife, his arms, his legs, and one other fun thing, allegedly, canon, and decided to make it a problem for trillions of people. What do you do with a man that's too angry to expire and hates everyone and himself? If you look up his K count, as it were, he's taken out about 150,000 sentient beings in his career. But if you include Alderaan and all the activities that he did as an extension and as like the fist of the Empire, we're talking millions, literally millions. Vader is the face, chest, and back of authoritarianism. Like, there's no debating it. Like, okay, 150,000 people personally, millions of people by extension, the face of the Empire, the poster boy for crushing people. So he's getting his own section on the political compass. I'm going to extend it, okay? That's what I'm going to do, and he's going to get one right at the very top and center. And you're more than welcome to disagree with me, but my brother in Christ, that man's face is a skull. There's nowhere else I can put him. Pretty open and shut. So we're going to move on to the last Sith Lord that we see in the original 6 Star Wars films, and that is, of course, Darth Sidious, Emperor Palpatine. Mr. Big Picture, probably the greatest generational run in any form of science fiction media. No one has a master plan, manipulates it from both sides, pulls it off so completely. The only thing he messed up was losing Anakin and gaining Darth Vader, which isn't really a loss, but the achievement is insurmountable. As I've already said, he's not quite my favourite, but there's just such an easy case for describing him as probably the most successful Sith Lord that you see, in terms of sheer power, in terms of intelligence, cunning, fighting skill, especially if you've seen Clone Wars. Some of those scenes are absolutely diabolical. And what we're looking at is, of course, a very classical Sith. Right, we're looking at a Sith that is very committed to the tradition of the Sith, even though he claims he's not. Right, he claims that he can discard the rule of two and be the one true Sith. He says as much to Plagueis in the Plagueis novel. But he ends up being a pretty consistently conservative Sith committed to the way of the Sith. Like, he's very committed to the idea of having an apprentice. He essentially believed in the rule of two, even though he claimed not to, because he always had this view that Anakin would become powerful enough to overthrow him. Even, like, if you think about why he took on Maul in Clone Wars, he fought Maul and Savage Opress and absolutely wiped the floor with them. His justification for that, he says as much, is that this is violating the rule of two. You are a rival and I now need to take you out. He claimed to hate the pomp and ceremony of lightsaber combat. He was a master at it, right? He was a master of all 7 forms, so there's that continuous commitment to tradition of both sort of Sith and Jedi arts, of preserving that knowledge. And even though I think Mace Windu did have one up on him because of the use of Vapad and being able to redirect the dark energy back at him as part of that form, I think that Sidious is probably one of the best combatants there in terms of those skills. And I think he would have wiped the floor had it been any other Jedi. And he did wipe the floor with all the other Jedi there. He was essentially the culmination of all the teachings and knowledge of all the previous Sith behind him, which is exactly what the rule of two is meant to be, this idea that this knowledge accumulates and concentrates as the time goes by. So you end up with a being that has all the best aspects of all the warriors, scholars, has this pure connection to the dark side. And that's exactly what Sidious is, right? All the other Sith would look at a Sith like Sidious and go, yeah, that's exactly what the end product should be. That's a warrior, that's a scholar, that's a schemer, that's a cunning a destroyer, that's someone who has a pure connection to the dark side. Again, by the time we meet him in Return of the Jedi, he's rejected the rule of two and believes that he's going to rule forever and that Vader's never going to overthrow him. But all of his behavior before that is like, right, okay, he eliminated his master when he felt he had become stronger than his master and that Plagueis had nothing more to teach him. He then sought out and essentially, fostered Anakin as a new apprentice who would be someone who could potentially replace him. And obviously that didn't go to plan because Anakin becomes Vader, that's all sidetracked. But there's this same continuity in terms of the philosophy and the mindset and the way that he's doing everything. It's all very traditionally Sith. It also totally goes without saying, as the founder of the Galactic Empire, that he is an authoritarian. So there's no other course than to put Palpatine in, I would say, obviously the Orth-Right quadrant, but I would say sort of below Vader and then much more to the right. Not quite as far as Dooku, but much more to the right. So this is what we end up with if we put all of the Sith Lords from Star Wars onto the political compass. Thank you ever so much for watching and making it to the end of the video. If you want to like, subscribe, share, comment, let me know what you think. If you agree or disagree, let me know your opinion. I'd be really interested to know. That would be absolutely awesome. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time. Plotline out.